Welcome to this Talk Skeptic to me. That's right, Gizmo is on with us now, the producer. But also, welcome to this episode of Talk Skeptic to me, the roots of the tree of life, with our special guest host, Pat Lowinger, as he joins us to tonight's show, where we get the expertise or experience from those that help us share their knowledge with others, especially the two schmucks before you that will be saying irreverent things and questions. So won't you join James W. and Amy Newman as myself as we climb these roots worth of fun. That's right. I do want to thank everyone out there for joining us. That's right. For joining us on the intertubes. I don't know how they get the internet out of it so effectively, but somehow they do. Please don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe, because then you'll gain access to that bell icon, which when set to all, will send you reminders to see our premieres or join our live streams like this one. Like, what is up, BMZ? I see he's like already apologizing for like flat earthers and everyone that comes across you with misinformation, and said he'd love to kill Doggy and the trusted ape, and I see many people doorknob head. What is up? I am also going to remind you all out there that these episodes like this are sponsored by not only our super chats, all of the lovely people that send them in, but all of our channel members who can be found right down there below with our evolving badge system right down there. If you reach down deep enough, it triggers creationists, especially the young earth variety.
It sure does, yeah.
You're saying just over time, it just evolves? It's basically our God. But also our Patreons at patreon.com/Amy Newman, which helps us make even more awesome content. I believe it was sponsored by Soros and Bahamut themselves. Apparently, they're also two separate people. Who knew? But yes, including awesome close friends. Exactly. Actually, I can't now. Every time I say Bahamut, I feel like I have to take him out because he's so adorable. If someone is going to send your soul to hell, I feel like he's the guy to do it.
A cuddly Bahamut.
So
he gets called a Bahamut on Discord servers. They declare her.
Yes, we learned, and once again, I don't want to be the one to always bring up the identity politics, but we learned that Bahamut was the original transgender. Yes, this person was, of course, like this. when we were talking with them, and they were very close to getting their medication.
Jacket.
But yes, I like to think of it as a jacket of hugs. Yes, but we would. James, we're just armchairs. What do we know? That would be anyway. Sending love out there, everybody out there. Dr. Taboo Weasel, everybody, as well as our supporters, because this is and we're gonna do a quick shout out because we want to give as much juicy time. I can't say juicy
right to the meat and potatoes.
For Pat, exactly. I also now can't think of like a tree of life without thinking of something Pandora, but that's just because I am the rare Avatar fangirl. But it's like my Christmas right now. Everyone thinks it's relevant again. If you like something long enough, it becomes cool enough again. Okay. Anyway, sending love to Oz from the Atheist Network Group. YouTube.com/The Atheist Network Group. Connecting Atheist Community was our whole episode last time. #TangGang. As well as a grumpy old Cuss sending love to Grumpy. Makes us go at these crazy young earth creationist arguments. Diana Smith, because, well, it turns out that women aren't chattel. It's like this crazy new thing. They even vote now. But also sending love to Pat Lowinger.
Happy to hear.
Long time
the
support.
Man with a plan. Exactly. Not only is he a longtime supporter, but Pat does. I'm gonna keep on saying it. What the creationists are afraid to do. If you believe something. That too. But also just go out into the field. Go out and do research. Pick up the fossils that they don't believe in. It'll be a crazy phenomenon.
The scariest in the world, Amy, if you just want to cling to your myths, if you don't go and look at any evidence, well, you haven't disproven them, right?
Exactly. Just hide it. Just don't even look.
Right. You just assert that it's true, and that's it. Close your eyes, plug your ears, and just say, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus.
The scary thing about that, Pat and James, that fossil was planted there by Satan. That's the worst thing about it. It looks so real. To test your faith.
Test your faith, yeah.
But thank you so very much, Pat. And thank you so very much, Dale Pastel, reminding us we're just looking for empirical evidence. A little bit of empirical evidence. Numerous times within the past few weeks, we're cheating when we ask for empirical evidence. T-Jump and I are cheating when we ask for a physical mind or a physical brain that then would host a mind. Because I'm okay with a mind being a little bit more software-y as long as you realize the software. It's when you install a game,
it needs hardware.
It's not like it's out in the ether. First of all, because the ether doesn't exist, but it's not just out there. Like it is, yes, it is information that someone has planned on there, but it needs to go on a computer. I'll go into tangent heaven. FUCUS. Sending love to Atheist Jr. as well, who just did a fantastic Darth Dawkins. Did he? It takes two to tango, and so they did. And if you were doing a time watch, 30 minutes, which is actually pretty good. I've seen some atheists get thrown out within like 5 minutes. Sir, am I talking to a teenager here? No, that's
why
just you
like
with
the snot-nosed 14-year-old.
14, and I just can't. This is the point that I've just been lingering on. Is he loves calling people like teens and adolescents, whatever, and yet like he doesn't show his picture, he doesn't show his face. So what is this giant orb telling you that you are acting childish? It is a giant Richard Dawkins head posted on top of Darth Vader. And it's like, why do you act like a kid? You can't. All you can do is think about, fantasy. All right, Vader. Anyway, enough of that.
Thanks, Darth.
Sending love to Dale and Davegar. Sending love to we just look for a thick Earth. We're looking for a thick Earth. Sending love to Davegar. Sending love to Scott. We don't find. We're not somehow. We don't find a flat Earth. We just find a big booty Earth, and we are okay with that. But sending love to Davegar. Sending love to Scott Duke, reminding us that animals, even Bahamets, they just want love. Sending so much love. Often triggered. We came from monkeys. Well, technically, yes. We share common ancestry, and we are apes. Holy moly. But sending love to Regos. We have a Skeptic Bible study. It's amazing. Go check it out. We actually do the crazy thing the Christians and Jews, I would suggest, every once in a while doing. It's reading your holy book. I'll include the Muslims, even though we're just reading the Torah and the Old Testament. But it applies to really all of the man. But sending love out there to Regos and sending the fabulous, lovely, amazing, super sexy Rachel Allen! Woo! Reminding us that, when the Christians try and tell us about slavery in the Bible, it's the good slavery, TM. That's right. It was a work.
Speaking of that, less than a month ago, before my debate with Phrase I Am on Standing for Truth, on that very topic, the goodness of physical slavery.
If there is nothing...
January 11th.
January 11th. Oh, well, we should do a community post as well. But if there's no topic that, Christians love to defend more, it's slavery. So, James, I'm going to keep on saying it. I find it honorable, noble, just brave of you to take
It is really
no side of slavery. It is, but someone has to.
It's a tough lift.
Someone has to. It is. But no.
It really encapsulates something is that, we don't think that everything in the Bible is bad. Occasionally, through dumb luck or happenstance, the Bible stumbles onto something that's not totally horrible or evil or untrue. Once in a while, it gets something right. So we're not saying everything in it is bad. It's just they have to say that everything in it is good. So even the indefensible parts of it, they still have to find a way to defend. We don't have to tear it all down. We actually just have to find one thing that's indefensible in it. And at that point, it loses its ability to, as a moral standard.
Yeah. I my new argument now is for why don't I believe in God is I'm just going to say it's the Stony Littleton long barrow and the Ammonite fossil found within. That's my answer from now on. Like, why don't you believe that the Bible's true? And that's my answer. The fact that this monument was made during the late Neolithic at 3500 BCE in southern UK, and the fossils that they used to decorate it, right, were already fossilized at 3500 BCE. So the fact that these were, monumentalized at a time that, the world supposedly began is quite funny. So that's my answer now. Stony Littleton long barrel.
It's like my flood debate when I didn't get to ask it during the debate, but I got to ask T-Rock after the debate. So I said, so what would you say for all the civilizations that the archaeologists have dated as existing before the flood, right through the flood, after the flood? Would you just say that they're all wrong? They've all been misdated? And he said, yeah, that's what I would have said, that they're
stilts.
Every single one of them is misdated. It's like
stilts.
Maybe
exactly. They're just going like
maybe
this.
if every civilization started after the flood, but you just had one outlier, this one thing that the archaeologists dated before, you might be able to say, well, maybe they made a mistake on that one. It's consistent with everything else. But no, they just got it all wrong every single time because they hate Jesus. probably.
Because it's true, they make baby Jesus cry. Also, I just want to hawk 3 books. So, very specifically, because I went to find it. This is the Skeptic's Annotated Bible. I just love showing this off because it's you could go out and get a nice hardcover, or it's online for free. They actually offer it online over here. This is, just because I was having it over here, the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. This is something you should always be having. 1 and 2 is already, and I just imagine, things come in 3s. I'm not saying it's gonna, but then there's actually someone with us that is actually getting a book, or has written a book, and it is about to be coming eventually.
Sure, that's what they tell me. So sometime next year, I'll make a huge announcement on data release. I don't have it yet. I've been but Betrayed, the Orthodox Subjugation of Women in the Early Christian Church is coming out. It's completed, reviewing it, and you guys will be reviewing it on the show. I'll send out a few copies to some people to probably read maybe 2 weeks before it's actually published. I don't get the advanced copies very early, so before it's actually released. So it's actually maybe only a week I'll get them. So, but I'll try to get them out as quickly as possible. So with that, I'm ready to start whenever you guys are.
Yes. So I just have 2 quick
Three
things.
more to do.
Yes, 3 more Patreons. And also, I just want to send out a really good shout out. Holy moly, thank you. Or should I just say moly? Thanks, you doctor. Just so much, Dr. Tobacco Weasel, for becoming a YouTube member. Welcome to the Skeptic and Ranting community. It is lovely to have you on board. And like I say, we can't help it. Your badge, it's just going to evolve. It just over time. Thank you, time, space time.
Life is better on the girl deck.
Oh, space time. Should I give you 10% of my paycheck? Nothing? Huh, no answer. Funny how that works.
Like when Kenobi asked Leo to get a jar of space time and watch it expand.
But yes, just like James said, welcome to the Girl Deck. It is lovely to have you, Dr. Tobacco Weasel,
Thanks, Doctor.
At the Skeptic and Ranting community.
It's Tapioca, right?
Tapioca Weasel.
Dr. Tapioca Weasel. Tapioca Weasel. Somehow you corrected me on the first. I have always had a wonderful command of Engelada. And it's just been a very strong. Yes. So Paige, I love this. Paige has a major announcement. New NFT digital cards. That's right, Pat.
I just want to point out that this is the problem with your show is I can actually see the chat when we're in StreamYard.
Oh boy.
And like the fact that God equals the square root of run and other people are tearing it up in the chat, making me laugh, is pretty funny because God doesn't exist because I'm not a fucking idiot was probably the funniest thing so far this stream.
Yeah.
You gotta love our chat.
Yes.
Sending love out to our chat. In fact, Big Bad Mama, James Wolfe, Caterpillar, all of the wonderful, fantastic people. And yeah, he's not that complex now. Let's say. Also, Senator Cato, separation of church and state, sending so much love out to you.
Thanks,
it is important now as ever. And you don't want to live in a theocracy or autocracy. Just choose secularity. But also, and democracy. And also James Wolfe is shouting at the moon and sending love as she sends us so much love. We send him so much love. Thank you. As we are mostly, if we see like daylight out there, it's because we've been streaming that long.
We've been going long.
It is the do. Oh, I can hear a crow outside. Okay, sending so much love to James Wolfe. I had to. I wanted to do a cock sound, but that would have been not safe for saying we're different puns. Anyway, Sending love to Disciple Day. Thank you so very much, the Skeptic Theus. We have Skeptic Theus on here. That's right. As well as I was sending love out there. Beavis comes on there as well. Sending love to Disciple Day. We love our Skeptic Theus. And then the two last but not least, thank you so very much, Ian Davenport. We see him everywhere when we are looking for all sorts of science and chopping away at creationist arguments. Because now I just want to use as many as I can at this point. And thank you so much, Ian Davenport. And last but certainly not least, thank you so much, Matty, reminding us that we have...
Thanks so much.
And we, as in scientists, have theories, frameworks of facts, whereas the young Earth creationists have nada. And all right. Although it's been 20 minutes... And that is long. That is actually short for us. We keep on working it. I know, Jay. Exactly. We are Speedy Gonzalez.
Setting records here.
Yeah. And all right. In that case, we do want to thank all of our the people who send in super chats, all of the fantastic channel members who down at the bottom you can join and become. Once again, thank you, Dr. Tapioca Weasel. Becoming a new member is lovely to have you on board.
Thank you,
and thank you for all of our Patreons, which enable us to make even more fun content, and of course, subscribers and viewers like you. Now, enough of the open house. Sam Harris would have... Yes, exactly. With that, tonight, we have Pat Lowinger, a historian, freelance writer, and educator. Patrick possesses...
the legend.
An MA in Ancient History from American Military University and an MA in Archaeology from University of Leicester. Also sending love out to the show Wednesday, which is amazing. Anyway, in addition to teaching...
Actual archaeologist.
Yes, instead of instead of internet archaeologist, Pat is an archaeologist on the internet, slightly different than creationist circles.
He also kills Nazis too, but just for fun.
Yes, exactly. Basically, he just goes by and it is... Oh! There we go. And there we go. But yes, he is currently conducting research in pursuit of his PhD in ancient Mediterranean studies. And with that, we are actually going to get the floor started for Pat Lowinger as we are Talk Skeptic to me on the roots of the Tree of Life. Wrong transitionary song!
Get it together now.
F-U-C-U-S. Pat, the floor is all yours.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Tonight's episode comes up because I occasionally get asked about, in Greek and Roman genres, is there an allegory for the Genesis account of the Tree of Life? Because we have a similar story regarding how evil comes into the world in the myth of Pandora, and that's related to Eve in many ways. But I'm asked sometimes, is there ever a more direct connection with a Tree of Life? And in Greek mythology, it's less clear. Probably the best example, or one of the best examples, because there's a few, is the sacred oak at Dodona. And for anybody who's not familiar with ancient Greece, Dodona is an oracle site where Zeus was believed to give divine revelation to a set of priests. And one of the major features of the sanctuary there where this activity occurred for about 1,000 years, by the way, and it was probably earlier than Delphi as far as a site for oracular Congress, where people came from all over ancient Greece and the ancient Mediterranean. But Dodona has a sacred oak as a symbol, and it was Zeus's sacred tree. At Dodona, the priests believed by going near the tree that they could receive divine revelation. But it's not a parallel directly to what we see in the Genesis account. So I get asked, well, is there something earlier? Now, I'm not a Assyriologist. If we really wanted a good answer on this, you should ask Dr. Josh or possibly Dr. Kip or somebody who specializes in either biblical or Mesopotamian texts, because that's where the connection occurs. But I figured Amy gets what she pays for, which is 0. So you get me. And so I'll try to answer your questions tonight, because this is an area of some concern, because there's a lot of misinformation. And so tonight, I hope to clear up some misinformation when you're talking to an apologist and maybe someone who maybe went on too far the other side, because it's not a clear answer, yes or no. It's kind of a strong maybe. So let's go ahead and jump into it. We're going to come back to this slide in the beginning. This is from the 9th century BCE, early 9th century BCE from Assyria. And if you're kind of already jumping ahead, you're like, hey, there's 4 figures there that kind of appear to be mirroring each other. And the center of that looks like a bush. I know it looks like a bush, but trust me, it's a tree. And we'll come back to this in a minute, and we'll see where this debate currently is in academia and what scholars think about the concept of a tree of life predating Judaism and the Hebraic tradition.
Is that a bird flying over it? What is that on top of it?
It's sort of a bird. It's known as a flying disc, but we will get back to that in a second. So
I have
Sure.
I have a question. How do you know that it's not actually shaven? That's my last question like that, and we can continue forward.
All right. And it was groomed.
I knew it. It's well maintenance, though. It's all about
the
take care of
maintenance.
yourself. Exactly.
And we lasted exactly 4 minutes in our presentation before it went into sex. Sweet. So when we get to fruiting bodies, it's all to you, Amy.
Yes. Oh, it normally is.
So you'll hear, for those in the audience that actually care, you may hear something called the ATL, Assyrian Tree of Life. And it's a very common used acronym by Assyriologists. When I first started getting into this topic a few years ago, I had to look it up because I don't study. That's not my area of focus. I'm like, what, ATL? Atlanta? No. It was, Assyrian Tree of Life, because there's a strong motif present. Now, the earliest depictions of trees in cuneiform and cylinder seals, again, don't have time to go into all that, but basically the earliest depictions of trees in Mesopotamian art are really dated to the late part of the 4th millennium BCE. Sometime 3300 BCE, but then definitely throughout the 3rd millennium into the 2nd millennium, we have growing and more detailed depictions of what will eventually become, quote unquote, the Assyrian Tree of Life motif. So understand, it's something that grew and was expanded and became more iconographically defined during this period. So
I couldn't have said that at all. So
well, yeah, and we've had 2 beers, so that happens when we're doing, Talk Skeptic to me.
We'll see if we can up that number as we go on.
So before we continue, I want to denote one important thing that Assyriologists, people that study the region, archaeologists, literary experts, no one would counter this statement. The influence of Mesopotamian culture on numerous and other cultures within the A&E and Mediterranean is undeniable. The ancient cultures of Mesopotamia influenced the region, including the ancient Levant. And that's where the eventual people that are going to be known as the Hebrews and then the Israelites are going to kind of have their genesis, for lack of a better term. Their ethnic and cultural identity will form in that region, which is a region that is, long before they appear in the historical record, is controlled by various entities, both in Anatolia and in Mesopotamia. So it's important to understand that there were a lot of people there that had exerted a lot of power and influence in that region before they got there. And also Egypt. Egypt is going to be an important part of determining what happens and the cultures that will be infused into those regions as well, as far as a controlling power, particularly during the late Bronze Age. So where this are, I'm going to not start from the very beginning, but just suffice to say 30 seconds. In about the 1870s, 1880s, there was some discussion about where does the concept of tree of life and Genesis come from. Assyriologists, who were one of the newest areas that were excavating, were occurring in the 19th century, were digging and finding these tablets and sometimes artistic depictions. They were seeing these images and trying to figure how they interacted with largely a Christian world and Western conception of trying to make the Bible fit. And very early on, they were like, well, there's trees, there's gods, maybe this has something to do with the Bible. And for a while, that was just the generally consensus. There was no text that actually said, word for word, that, this is what we believe about the tree of life. It wasn't called the tree of life. It was just depictions. They talked about sacred places with gardens and trees, but nothing that specifically was a one-for-one parallel. Talk about that a little bit more in a second. But in 1993, a really esteemed Assyriologist, now he's still alive, he's in his late 70s, early 80s now, known as Simo Parpola, is a very distinguished academic from the University of Helsinki. He sits on many journals, boards, and he's been considered a huge contributor to the field of Assyriology and archaeology, and kind of one of those big brain people that much of his work is cited throughout the field. In 1993, he wrote an article, a pretty extensive article. It's like 60 pages. It was called The Assyrian Tree of Life, Tracing the Origins of Jewish Monotheism and Greek Philosophy. And it was published in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies. And it was kind of revolutionary. It was taking what had already been kind of thought and pushed it to where he was making some very broad and in some cases very specific claims that even like Jewish Kabbalah could be traced to this Assyrian Tree of Life, that the connection to all religions throughout the region where you could draw lines. It was very connected, that there was hidden numerology within the system. And many people initially were taken aback, and many young people, new Assyriologists in the 1990s, thought, wow, this is the way we're going, and this is going to be the greatest thing since, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls for our understanding of ancient Mesopotamia. But people started reading his work with a little more detail, and some of his initial hypotheses that he used to build this overarching theory started to fall apart. Some of the connections he made were much more tenuous than he kind of published. And so others in the field throughout the, from like the publication in 93 and 94, they started saying, well, Parpola has some great ideas, but the evidence he's using is kind of tenuous, and we should probably take a big step back from it.
It's more speculation.
Yes. But when it came out in 1993, because he was a leader in the field, everybody jumped on it. And I hate to use this term, but people that are zeitgeistists went overboard. People like Bill Maher I'm using him as an example, was one of these people and saying, well, one leading Assyriologist says that the Bible takes directly from Assyrian texts, right? And says word for word that the Tree of Life is taken directly from the mythology and texts of ancient Assyria. So lay people misinterpreted Parpola's work. Even Parpola would say, well, that's not what I wrote. But in general laymanship, it was easy to see how people arrived at that conclusion. So many people said, the Bible's been completely debunked. The Tree of Life is stolen in the biblical account, is stolen directly from Mesopotamian texts. Again, just like the Noah account, we got you Christians and Jews. Your Bible's a work of fiction stolen from other people. And so for a while, that remained, for about 10, 15 years, that remained the leading public presentation of this work. In the meantime, the people that study Assyria and the Assyriologists and Mesopotamian studies, they started going, yeah, we need to start retracting. And so before we continue, currently Parpola's view doesn't represent prevailing scholarship. It's been largely, there's some parts of it that are still said that's useful, but a big chunk of it has been rejected by the overwhelming majority of Assyriologists today. So if you were taking a course in 1993, 94, you would have heard all about this emerging scholarship. But today, it's kind of like a bump on the road. You hear about it, you may even read some of Parpola's papers and realize why his analysis is flawed. Now, this shouldn't take away from all the important work he did, but this is one of the places where he's not admitted he was wrong, but he just understands why there could be some misinterpretation by over exuberant people about his work. Again, whether or not he's ever going to retract, he's pretty senior now in his age. I don't know if he's willing to retract some of the things he said, but there's been some articles published that kind of break down his work that he hasn't responded to. And in academic terms, when someone critiques you and you don't follow up, it's kind of an acceptance that some of their criticisms are valid.
And I just have to say that some of those older Assyriologists, let me tell you. I'm sorry. This is I'm gonna let you get on to slide 3, and then I'll actually bring up the pink elephant that I've been trying to not make that joke. So right. I'll let you get to slide 3. You're good.
No, it's good. But before we move on, we see numerous depictions of what we typically call the tree of life. Again, whether or not that's a good term, some people now use a term sacred tree, because whether or not it's the tree of life is the point of debate, right? Whether or not we should be calling this particular object depicted in a lot of artwork, but particularly during this period of the Neo-Assyrian period, whether or not we should be calling it the tree of life is the point of debate. Now, among Assyriologists, they use the term, but they know how they're using it. So when an Assyriologist says, yeah, we have depictions of the tree of life, they're not necessarily talking one for one with the account in Genesis. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. But unless you're really familiar with how the terminology is used, you can get lost in the weeds and buy into this idea, which many, and I hate to say it, atheists make this mistake, particularly those that are trying to really take a critical approach to Christianity. They go, well, yeah, it's been completely debunked. It's still kind of it's still an area of some considerable debate within the scholarship. Now, you can go see this panel at the Brooklyn Museum. I have some nice artwork. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I will explain the iconography in the second to last slide before we conclude, rather than doing each one individually. So just understand there's numerous depictions throughout the period where we think that the ancient Israelites and Hebrews were drawing from for their representative images. So understand, we're very prominently displayed. All right. Let's get to the root of the matter. Pun. So since it was this radical departure, we do know that there are a lot of tree motifs in ancient Mesopotamia. Was he right? Wow, that came out bad. See, that's why you proofread your slides before you go on YouTube. Doesn't matter. But we see depictions of Assyrian gods like we saw in the first 2 slides, interacting, being blessed, picking what appears to be picking fruit. That's actually not what's going on in most cases, with a tree of life or a sacred tree. But the Assyrians never called it that. They never referred to the tree between those divine beings. Sometimes it's 2 divine beings looking at it. It's known as went to 4. Don't know why I did that. While they're looking in mirror form to the tree, it's really the same being looking at it from 2 directions. The important thing to remember is that these depictions, sometimes there's 4 people, sometimes there's trees of life on each side of a single image, but it wasn't referred to. In no place does the Assyrian text that we have refer to something that directly translates as the tree of life. Are there some implications? Are there some implied? Yes. And that's because you have to look at the entire texts in totality and go, well, the imagery is very similar, and it appears that these traditions are where other cultures are drawing from. But is there a one-to-one comparison? No. Why isn't it just called a sacred tree? Because there's a good reason to call it a tree of life, because of the cultic activity associated with the cultic activity associated, and because there was this, and again, we talk about the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, there was an initial use of the term that kind of stuck among people studying it. And since academics were using that term and the term's been qualified within the field, they still feel comfortable using it. But with lay people, it may not be the best term to use. And that's why some academics have started, typically always using the tree of life, the ATL, or the sacred tree, right? So in some places you'll actually see them used synonymously now. Now, trees are ubiquitous across cultures. There were some people early on, there was a concept known as parallelomania, where we find something in one culture that looks like something in another culture, and we try to draw a direct connection. One of the important things is you look at ancient Mesopotamian ziggurats, right? And then you look and the tree,
I built those in StarCraft. So
right? And you look at the iconography of trees in Mesopotamia, and you find out that in Mesoamerica, they built pyramids that looked like ziggurats, and there were a lot of tree iconography. Then obviously they're the same cultural group, and they had a huge amount of contact, and you try to draw a one-to-one comparison. Don't do that, because these attempts largely fail, and it's really just kind of a desire to engage in really bad scholarship. And parallel mania was a really big thing until recent academic works where they started pushing away on it. Again, like the early Christian studies where Christ myth study, everything was a parallel. Every god is a parallel to Christianity. Everything pagan has a parallel in Christianity. And it really doesn't all the time. And sometimes those parallels are kind of not as one-to-one as people want to make them out to be. Is Christianity a mystery religion? They used to be said, absolutely. Well, scholarship's backed up on this as well. It has many traits. I could see you making the argument, but it's not a clear one-to-one argument like with other mystery religions, such as the cult of Mithras, right? So again, it's important to the Mithraic mysteries, right?
I would also say it's not a mystery religion unless it has a twist. No, James, whatever you were saying.
It's like a divergent evolution, just because their cultures dealing with similar circumstances and different things. Yeah, so they made similar type buildings. It doesn't necessarily mean they were in contact with each other. It's just a pretty badass shape for a building, and they thought so, and the other group thought so, so they built them.
Yeah. So and that's really fair. To tell you how much pushback there was on this work being done by Parpola in the 90s, again, I'll say early 90s. In 1996, there was a special panel of Assyriologists. Again, it's known as the American Oriental Society. They study ancient Mesopotamia. They've had a special panel discussion at their annual meeting to debunk Parapola's work, or at least parts of it. Stuff that was the kind of the most, as they would put it, of open to critical to deconstruction, right? We'd call it, man, they push back against the bullshit parts of it, right? And so that was how the field was handling it. And in some instances, Parpola actually kind of retracted his work a little bit. He spoke differently about it. Although he didn't retract the papers, he said, I can see your misinterpretation of my work. Now, despite the field of Assyriology going, hey, let's kind of slow down and pump the brakes on this tree of life in Assyria being one for the depiction in Genesis, non-specialists kept referring to Parpola's work as definitive. So you again, the people that were quote mining zeitgeists kept going to Parpola's work and kept quoting these papers he had written, and saying, look, the leading Assyriologist in the world, which he was one of many, but he's a leader, but he kept being quoted. And even though other leading Assyriologists saying he's wrong or he's wrong in places, it didn't matter. And this work kept getting just retrended. Luckily, it was before Twitter, or it would have blown up huge and no one else would ever got any work published. But when you actually have a formal panel rebuttal on your work in the field, that shows that that people are concerned that you're kind of giving us a bad name. You need to slow down. So that kind of shows how the field reacted. And basically, one of the best, I paraphrased a quote, so it's not a direct quote, but there's a guy named Gerald Cooper. He's a PhD at a university you may have heard of called Johns Hopkins. You may know another doctor from Johns Hopkins who's a Assyriologist. But basically, despite being a scholar of impeccable credentials, Parpola's work goes far beyond the available evidence and appears to have fallen in the realm of zeitgeist, or at least parts of it, right? That too many tenuous and unfounded extrapolations were made, and there were some problems with the work that led itself to being used inappropriately by people, particularly lay people. Although we can talk about direct and indirect translation of iconography in religious traditions, there was no textual evidence to say this was directly taken from here, as there is in the Noah myth. The Epic of Gilgamesh shows numerous parallels that make it very easy to draw these direct comparisons,
much more
as
direct.
did the Genesis, right, and the Epic of Atrahasis. Very easy to say, no, the Noah flood myth is lifted in whole or in exceedingly large part, over 90%, from other traditions. So again, when it came to their flood account, the ancient Israelites or the Hebrews, copied their neighbor's homework and copied it so bad it was obvious. They actually wrote the wrong names on the paper. So that's important to remember. But when it comes to the tree of life, it's less clear. But still, most people consider the source of the Hebraic tradition does come from Mesopotamia and more likely the Assyrian tradition.
Certainly influenced by or
Correct.
Inspired by, but not.
And that's the important thing. And you've already stolen my thunder, and I'm glad you did. That's the point of this presentation. Is it's more likely than not, but not a certitude.
And I also want to say, as you are giving the introduction, as we are on slide 3, I just have to point out that as we have been talking about Assyrian kings and gods, as we have been talking about all of these astrologists, I just want to point out that it is often confused to a lot of lay people that it is actually the study of a really fine ass. And so we just want to put that misconception to rest academically right now. And with that,
part of Beamsy's cult that he's got going on over there.
Exactly.
I didn't want to out Amy, but she did write Dr. Bowen an email asking how she become an ass Syriologist because she was interested in the subject.
And I was typing that message with one hand. I hope he returns it. Pat, once again, the floor is right back to you.
But this is the other part of the evidence that's highly suggestive. And by the way, sacred trees are important when we study myth tradition. We could spend a whole, hours and hours, days and days talking about trees. One important thing that we do have from various texts are mythologies involving trees. Many of them come out of Mesopotamia. Why are trees so important? We can identify these are the actual cuneiform tablets, the texts sometimes that are either directly found in cities in Mesopotamia or in places in Anatolia, the Hittites and others, but this tradition comes out, right? So we can use these texts to kind of recreate the traditions of the region and then at various time periods. Now, we know that in Genesis we have an account of a tree of life, and in many instances interpreted as a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, many traditions have one or both of these iconographic forms, depicted in their art. Now, the ancient Assyrians themselves never referred to a tree of life or a tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is the translation that we use in English from the Hebrew, right? And so, but that's not a good place to start. What we need to start with is, what do they have? And what they do have is and I'm just going to call it the Mesopotamian, but it's largely the text we're looking at are Assyrian. They do have a very important identity to trees being sacred. Trees being sacred as symbols of fertility, which in the cultural context of the Assyrians was life. Fertility was more than just reproduction. It was renewal, rejuvenation, and often can be interpreted as life-giving. So calling the sacred tree in an Assyrian context the tree of life is maybe culturally appropriate, but it's linguistically not allowable because there's no word for it. The word life isn't included. So although it culturally represents that, these trees, the symbology associated with them, the cultural reference points lead towards fertility and life. They don't ever call it that. It's always descriptive rather than definitively being named that way. And that's important to understand. So a lot of this requires some textual interpretation. And it's a symbol. Much like in the Greek tradition, I always bring it back to the Greeks and Romans because that's where I focus. We talk about the cornucopia, right? Which is a common symbol of fertility, but also the giving of life, nurturing. The symbol in the Assyrian iconography is associated in very similar ways. Now, I will tell you that fertility being such an important part of ancient ritual activity in even ancient Israel, the concept of a tree of life in the Genesis account isn't just about temporal life of humans. It could have been considered a much larger concept, which we can't get into tonight. But understand, when we're not talking the limited, we're talking the more pluralist view of what a tree of life can be represented. And in many contexts, we're talking about a fertility symbol that has attributes of not only annual fertility, but seasonal fertility and temporal fertility of people in themselves, and like giving of life in kind of a concept of divine providence. So again,
was it just for like human fertility, or is it more like
fertility of the planet,
of the land? Okay, so everything, all encompassing.
So
life
why? And this concept's really important because when we talk about the Genesis account, most people read into it. Now, Assyriologists and biblical experts, textual critics, don't read it this way. They kind of approach it with a knowledge of all the contemporaneous cultures, right? And they go, the tree of life is in the Garden of Eden, right? That's the biblical account in Genesis. Many people go, well, the tree of life is just the tree that gives you everlasting life, right? But that's not,
as opposed to the other tree, which only gives you everlasting love,
right? Or knowledge of good, of good and evil, right? And whether or not they're the same tree, we can argue about that later. But the important thing is that we have numerous textual references, one of them being contained within the Epic of Gilgamesh, but there are others that probably came out earlier out of Sumer, and actually did come out earlier from Sumer. But the gods in ancient Mesopotamia lived in divine gardens that were referred to as such. They were either referred to as divine gardens, gardens where the gods dwelled, or gardens of paradise. Again, the reference to Eden is very close. Remember, God walks in the garden. Now, in Mesopotamian mythology, if you just follow me real quick, Epic of Gilgamesh, remember, they go to the land of Unapishtim, right? The gods lived in many ways. Hold on one second.
That's okay, peasant. I will just listen to you talk about my history.
Right. The Mesopotamians often believed that there were these nexus points. The garden was on Earth, the planet, right? And so the gardens where the gods dwelt was in proximal relation. Now, in some epic texts, it's at a higher place, and you got to travel through special magical lands to get there, like a pathway. But in other depictions, it's basically just a place where the gods can come down and dwell, because there were temples in Mesopotamian tradition that were considered gardens to the gods that were built on Earth, but the temple itself was considered a garden to the gods because gods were believed to symbolically live there as well. So this is where sacred trees being depicted within these texts, and there being references to gardens, is the point where most Assyriologists and people that study this period are drawing this. Well, they're referring to trees of life in a very similar context as we see in the Genesis account.
So there's a question coming in for you, Pat, from Dr. Tapioca Weasel. Says, are the trees being discussed most accurately trees, or rather the word bush, flower, more appropriate?
So depending on the text we're looking at, and that's actually a really great question. In some depictions, we know that, for example, the slide we're looking at right now, the cone being held up in the air is typically, among most Assyriologists, is identified as, again, the genus and species doesn't matter, but it's known as a Turkish pine cone, which is a pine tree that grows in modern Turkey. Now, some Assyriologists actually identify that as a date bushel, like dates grow in little bushels, right? So some Assyriologists says, no, it's a date palm reference. Most Assyriologists say, no, it's a pine cone, because we have other textual evidence showing that how pine cones were used in ancient Mesopotamia, for particularly among the Assyrians, for rituals of purification. We'll talk about that in a minute on the last side. But in some instances, right, the word tree isn't a one-for-one all the time. In some places, flower might be the appropriate word, but most of the time tree is used because it's the best parallel to what we have in the original Assyrian, right? So that's what they usually go with. That's a great question.
Woo-hoo. Thank you so very much, Doctor.
So, how influenced were the ancient Israelites by these images? It's undeniable, but the argument is how much. But it's definitely not 100%. It wasn't like they took one for one. But the argument being that, how nuanced is this scholarship? When it comes to like the Noah account, it's easy. When it comes to the depictions of in Genesis, God's spirit or force traveling over the water. Many people can draw other epic, can say, look, that's coming from this textual source. It's pretty obvious to us because we're familiar with the literary traditions of these societies. But when it comes to the Tree of Life, there's still a lot of debate out there and exactly how influential the Assyrians were in this case, and other cultures that preceded the Neo-Assyrians, how influential they were on the ancient Israelites. And again, both during and after their exile is really important as well, because the Assyrians are going to be gone largely by the point that the Babylonians released the captured people of Judah and returned them. So it's important to understand that, but it's very nuanced at times. But it's important to understand there's a lot of evidence showing. And by the way, just to keep things straight, these people are known as Apkalu,
which I am horrible at.
Right, Apkalu are wisdom spirits, and you'll see them depicted in a lot of Assyrian and other Mesopotamian art. They are a form of divine protector, but they're most important to be seen as agents. Like, you could think of them as great spirits that impart wisdom to rulers. So they're often depicted in combination with the kings and leaders of particularly Assyria. So they're not gods themselves. They're like agents of the gods.
What influence did the Assyrians have on the Babylonian?
Well, the Babylonians are later. The Neo-Babylonians are going to be a later version. Like these cultures just keeps rising on the other. So for a time period, the Assyrians are going to conquer the Levant, right? They're going to they're going to be the people that conquer the northern kingdom. And so these influence for quite a bit of time, they're vassal states. Israel's a vassal state. Judah's a vassal state to the Neo-Assyrians. Later, they're going to fall into decline, and it's going to be the Babylonians. But the Babylonians are going to be taking large parts of what is now the declining Assyrians, right? So it's just this kind of recycling, and all these cultures start blending into each other, and they borrow from the earlier culture. Not always entirely. They blend their older tradition with this newer tradition, and often we get something that's hybrid coming out of these intermittent periods. So what we see a lot in Egypt as well during this period. In the same time period right now, we've left what is the Old Kingdom, and we're into the third intermediate period. So again, a lot of cultural influence from the outside during these periods.
Commingling.
Mm-hmm. And that's what to be expected. So let's talk about iconography real quick, and then we'll take some more questions before we conclude this. This is a depiction. You can actually see this one at the British Museum. It's dated, again, early 9th century to the reign of Ashur-nasir-apal II. Again, if the dates are right, it's I'm going to get it wrong, but I think it's 883 to 859 is when he ruled. And I should have had notes, but hey, I knew this off the top of my head when I was preparing the slides, and now it's blanked. But there's some important images here. This is a mirrored depiction. There is one genie in mirror to himself and the king himself, right? So the king is closest to the central image, which is the Tree of Life. Now, I just want to cover why there's so many important parts here. Genies are protective spirits. They're slightly different than the other agents of wisdom that we talked to. These are protecting the king and the kingdom itself, particularly the palace. But this is like the agents that watch over the king. You might want to think of them as guardian angels, but that's not really the best concept. And whether or not genie is the best word we should be using too, that's a subject of some debate. But genie is a cultural term in the region, so it tends to be used. You notice that the genie is holding a small bucket. That small pail, bucket, whatever you want to refer to it as, contains, in all likelihood, water, although it's argued it can be some other things, but the leading consensus is water. You'll notice they're holding a pine cone in their hand, or what is believed to be pine cone. Again, among the leading, the most scholars think it's pine cone, some think it's a cluster of dates.
I also just want to add one rarely known fact. This genie actually a descendant of the same genie from Aladdin. Don't know if anyone knew that, but just putting that on there.
Right. So in the yellow, the bucket's depicted. In red, in the red circle, is the cone. Now, what's this used for? And the reason we can interpret this art, this iconography, is because in literary texts, they talk about the purification rituals associated with kings. Kings were daily ritually purified. So when they were doing their king stuff in order to protect them throughout the day, in the morning, they received this divine cleansing, divine purification. Two of the implements used were these buckets. that contained sacred
I
water.
knew like the priest.
Yeah, and the pine cone was the implement dipped in, and then that was used as kind of an impromptu Gotentag, right? Sprinkler. So that's depicted in red, and you'll notice it's the same imagery on both sides in mirrored form. Now the king is holding two implements, one in the orange box, which is a large rod or scepter of office. And you'll notice a lot of this iconography matches up to what things you would see in Egypt, right? In his other hand, in the kind of fluorescent green circle, is a small, short, looks like a stick with a bump on it, but that's actually representative of a mace, a weapon of war, instrument of divine wrath and leadership. It's great warriors, and that goes all the way back to Egyptian. Again, you're talking late 4th century in pre-dynastic period when we see something known as the Narmer Pala in Egypt. There's a great mace depicted in the early, and that'll become an instrument, an iconographic tool in Egypt as well. Mace is seen as power and smiting, so it's important to understand that it's a symbol. Right. It's instead of a sword, they carry a mace, but it's important to understand that this is a divine icon. And the pharaohs use a very similar icon that we see in Mesopotamia, and this is carried through in a huge amounts of forms throughout the region, not just in Mesopotamia, but the Mediterranean and Anatolia as well.
Also, one last fact that you may not have known, they may have been against swords. However, it was written that they carried Glocks. It was very well known, kings and queens. Pat, once again, right back over to you.
Yeah. In that little purple circle is the fruiting body, which is sometimes interpreted as a pomegranate. Other people will assert that it's a date cluster, but basically it's a fruit. Doesn't matter because they talk about the fruits of these sacred trees. So it's obvious. Sometimes they're what they call them occasionally varies, but pomegranate, or we'll just say loosely fruit, is often how it's interpreted. The sacred fruit from the sacred tree. And that's important to understand that the fruit itself was seen as a divine abundance. It was the component that could be plucked forth by, in this case, the humans, or the semi-divine kings who are acting as agents, the greatest agents on earth, and their priests as divine nourishment. And that's why a lot of these depictions are depicted the way they are. The fruiting body itself was seen as a divine implement of itself, a divine fruit. I mean, I don't know how to say it. It's something that was theoretically, and I shouldn't say theoretically, was metaphysically tangible to the realm of the living.
Pat, if there is something I am extremely familiar with, it is a divine fruit. But I just want to also put out there that Dr. Tapioca Weasel, I see that. I think you said your answer may have gotten, your question may have gotten answered. If so, amazing. And if not, everyone keep on sending in your comments or questions for Pat Lowinger, because we are Talk Skepticing to us. And yeah, Pat, once again, right back to you.
Okay. And you'll see in that dark blue circle, there's like the center part of the upper part of the tree. Well, that's known as the crown. And why is that important? Because that shows divine, well, it's a crown. It's supporting this concept of divine rulership, divine power. So crowns, this is the imagery associated with the crown of the tree, that there's divine leadership within this tree. This tree is more important than just as a holy plant. It's a symbol of the strength and of not only the gods themselves, but of the kings and leaders of ancient Assyria. Like, again, I don't want to draw the weirdest parallel, but if you remember your Middle Earth from Tolkien, the white tree of Gondor, right? When the tree withered, Gondor withered. When the tree grew strong, Gondor was strong. Again, it's a very similar parallel, and many people have said that's where Tolkien stole it. It's from ancient Mesopotamia. In that light blue circle is something known as a flying disc. Now, interestingly enough, if you look really close to the iconography, there's a little guy inside it, but that's actually a depiction of a god way up in heaven, and that god is typically identified as Samash. And if you look at his hand, on his right hand, he wears a ring of rulership, and he's kind of watching over the king as the king attends to the sacred tree. Understand that the imagery here is the gods are above, the spirits are in proximity to the king as agents of the gods, particularly in this case, Samash, and that the tree is what he interacts with on a spiritual and sometimes could be a physical level, because they did plant royal gardens inside temples and inside places adjacent to where the kings themselves ruled. There you get the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon are one example, right? Like this is all within the textual traditions of the region, as well as the cultural traditions that bled outside of the region and was very influential.
And if you are playing Civilization, you better be building Hanging Gardens. It gives you 10% more people and food. It is an amazing world wonder. You should be building Hanging Gardens. It has our seal of approval.
Right.
Continue, Pat.
And really,
was
that's
there
kind
an
of
actual tree though, or is this purely figurative, or was there an actual tree that the king would interact with in this way?
that seems to be now. So was it a tree in the concept of a potted plant sitting in the middle of the temple?
Right.
Maybe early on, where later these trees may be fashioned out of basically metals and precious gems. That appears to have happened as well. So these were representations that were very important as cultic symbols. And it didn't have to necessarily be a potted plant. It could be a representation of the plant, right? This is a spiritual conception. I'm going to give you the example of depicting, a water fountain. Do you need an actual water fountain to depict a water spirit, or can you just have someone carve out of either wood or marble what appears to be water spouting forth out of a fountain, and it would have the same cultic representation, right? It doesn't have to be an actual, but you could have water coming in through a pipe that fills a sacred font. How you interacted with those objects might be different. In the case where you have a marble depiction of water flowing, right, which painted, because in antiquity they largely painted their sculpture. You may have a pail of water sitting next to it, represents the water that is represented as coming through this quote unquote divine image or object, right? This cultic object. So it can vary, and it varies at times at various regions as well. So that's what we see in ancient Mesopotamia. It has different forms at different times.
So there could have been something in a temple, like a physical representation,
right?
Of it.
And that's
could have been made out of metal or gold, but
correct. And they didn't have to be full-size representations. They could have been miniaturized representations as well. And remember that a lot of the artwork, all this artwork that surrounds temples and particularly kings' palaces, is all painted. So the palace itself becomes not only just a bureaucratic office, but it becomes a place of representing divine imagery.
It's also not about how big the representation is, but it's about what it means to the people.
Well, so this one in particular, this panel is shit. It weighs 2,500 pounds. I forgot the exact dimension, but it's like, I think it's 90 inches tall. And I don't remember how.
This would have been painted originally?
Yeah, it would have been painted originally. Or at least that's the leading conjecture of it.
That's about how big.
Not all of the Assyrian stuff was painted. But we do know that by the Persian period, they were painting a lot of their stuff. So it's some places yes and no. The Greeks painted everything. It's less clear exactly how much of it got painted and whether or not they painted the whole thing or just parts of it. But that's a question for Josh, which brings me to my last slide. I know that there's going to be a lot of questions. I'll try to answer as many as I possibly can. Love you all. But for those that really need to answer some more questions, in conclusion, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Joshua Bowen at Digital Hammurabi, where you can pick up a copy of the Atheist Handbook Volume 2 and How to Read Ancient Sumerian. And he doesn't know I did this. So when you guys ask him all these questions about this episode, I think he'll get a big kick out.
Be sure to tell him Pat sent you.
This is the academic version of throwing you under the bus. And you're welcome, Josh, because, this should have been him doing this episode.
Oh, my. That's right, Dr. Josh. That just means now you need to come in here and talk about the 7-day watch cycle.
Yeah, well, and so this is really what happens with
Josh, Dr. Josh.
Like Josh did. Yeah, you could do this. Pat, you can handle it. Okay. Well, any questions they have that I can answer, they're going to you. So, and that's all I have. And if there's any questions we'd like to have you ask them now, but yeah, feel free to, throw some questions to Josh. This is something he knows quite about between him and Megan, and Digital Hammurabi can also use your support as a website.
Hells yeah, you should be checking out everything both Pat and Dr. Josh are doing. These are, once again, what the young earth creationist movement kind of lacks, where it rhymes with macamemic. Trying to remember macamemic. It's never gonna come to my head. It's probably some liberal conspiracy anyway. Sending so much love. We have been Talk Skeptic today on the roots of the tree of life, and with that, we are actually going to be transitioning into a Q&A where you guys can say anything that you would like as we continue ranting on the subject and anything on our minds, and then allow Pat to give his final thoughts on the subject at hand. But yeah,
and Rejos, that's really a good thing to remember. Might want to throw that comment up. Megan Lewis, that's Josh's wife, has been reading. They're doing a current thing on the Epic of Gilgamesh, so you actually have someone who can read it in the original language, reading it for you and doing commentary. And it's an actual, if you haven't been watching this podcast, they're on YouTube. It's actually awesome.
Dream team. And yeah, sending love to Megan, Josh, and Pat for being with us here tonight. We already have, I'm sure, an extremely serious question. So is Pat saying Dr. Josh Bowen is the best place to learn about a good root?
Yes. And actually, probably Megan's the best place to learn. But no, they're both together. I think they're pretty good. And there's a lot of good Assyriologists. I just want to pitch a book that I read for this broadcast. Again, Biddy, like a Biddy used to go. Amy does the same thing as Biddy used to do to me on our show. Hey, Pat, can you get, how much do you want to study on this? I'm like, well, I'll just read a book. Like, I already know something about it, but I want to grab one of the more current books on it and kind of go through it. I think it's 2007, 2010, sometime in there. Marina Giovino, she's serious scholar in Assyriology, wrote kind of like a book that took all the scholarship and analyzed it. So she's not writing about herself. She's writing about the current field of studies regarding what we call the tree of life motif in Assyriology. And it's known as the Assyrian Sacred Tree, a history of interpretations. And it's a pretty serious book, but I actually think you can get a copy of it either cheap, used, or digital copy online, and it might be free. I didn't pay for mine because I have access to the Orbis Bibliacus, the journal that published it, or the institution. So it's the University of Friedberg Press. So but that's one thing. Her last name is spelled Giovino, and she'll take you through it. Now, she ultimately concludes what she believes to be what she thinks is the strongest theory, but she works through all of it and talks about the strengths and weaknesses of each of these ideas and concepts.
And we can work through it together.
Right.
But thank you so very much, BBC and Pat, for your answer. And what is up, Randolph Richardson in the house?
They have trees in Canada, so he should probably know all about this.
What? Somehow I lost my little. Oh, there he is. Oh, that's amazing. But yes, another question coming in from Richard Madison. Is there some written or unwritten law on some steel demanding that scholars of the ancient Near East wearing plaid?
No, I live in the PNW and it was effing cold. But I definitely, when I work outside, I actually did a little bit of archaeology today. Yeah, I just was wearing this shirt because it's warm and we're getting hit with like 30. It was like 32 degrees when I went outside today.
Also, when he's punching Nazis and he gets blood on his shirt, right. It goes right off.
That was my former career. I don't punch anybody anymore.
Woo-hoo. sending love to James Wolfe, asks, Pat, a bit off topic, but I thought and actually before I even asked this, when you said Tolkien, I was like looking through my books, and I tried my actual fiction novel should be on top, and I embarrassingly do not have a Tolkien. I don't know where my Tolkien. I have 2 Game of Thrones hanging up there, and yet I don't know where my Tolkien is.
So James is right, and I'm right. The one thing Tolkien did was draw from a lot of traditions, and the Norse in Norse mythology, the sacred tree, tree of life, tree of the world tree, is largely another concept which is very similar to the concept that was pertained in other region. So it's a common.
Before you finish that thought, sure. I just want to finish the question. But I thought the Tolkien may have derived the White Tree of Gondor from the Norse Yggdrasil. Yeah, I love drizzling things like chocolate syrup as well. Any thoughts?
So yes, it's a great question. And some people said, well, he's also referring to this because he was taking a lot of mythic traditions. Now, one thing Tolkien was really good is he drew from Norse mythology, which largely where we get the term Middle Earth, by the way. But he also knew quite a bit about Indo-European and Indo-Iranian mythologies as well. So he had a large swath of stuff to pull from. And so some people said, well, he's not just talking only about Norse mythology, because look over here in Mesopotamia, they have a tree of life motif that I don't want to make all the Norse pagans angry, but appears at least to have been depicted in form that we can identify earlier. Like, again, we don't know how long it existed in the German motif because it goes back, 5,000 BCE, best guesstimates. But, later Norse mythology that we can identify within the archaeological record as being definitively talking about the Great Tree is a little more tenuous, just like it is talking about the earliest depictions in Mesopotamia. I mean, we have some depictions around 3,300 BCE, but they're not the motif that is as clearly shown by, 1,200, 1,100, 900 in Assyria, for example, which was why I focused on those images today, because Assyria is going to, right before the period before the Hebrews are going to be writing their Bible. By the way, Genesis is one of the later books. It's not an earlier book. It's a book that is compiled during the exilic and post-exilic period. So it's after the Assyrians had conquered the northern kingdom of Israel.
1.
Right, exactly. And so that's important to remember too. We're looking at when the
originally it started off with just Abraham, and then they went back, and
that appears to be exactly
backstory with that after.
No, but yeah, and James is right, because Tolkien was better than, like, for example, C.S. Lewis. Tolkien he made it largely Germanic, right? But he did pull in from other places as well. Remember, Tolkien talks a lot about people from the East. And when he talks about the East, he's talking about people that he was paralleling in many ways, people that came from the Near East and Far East. So he brings those cultural groups into his work as well.
Thank you so very much, James Wolfe, sending love, as well as Pat for the answer. Still sending love again to Randolph. We should be checking out the Fortnite Convince Us That a God Exists or Goddess. Exactly. However, they're also going to be starting. We just started uploading them here. And so we're also going to be uploading them weekly. I just want he says fortnight. I like to say bi-weekly.
Every fortnight.
Just because I want the weeks to be able to have sex with whatever gender that they want. And
pan-weekly.
Pan-weekly. What is up, commands? Cyborg. Woohoo! Hello, world. I love that phrase. It's just, every computer scientist first set of words. Randolph Richards says, here are some trees for Pat Lowinger. Sending. So can we just talk about this?
They have those in Canada, I think.
Help me out, Pat, because I make this joke like often, and it's like off topic, except for the fact that it's about trees. Excuse me. How? And I know somehow, but do the academic version. How do you get a group of people who have a book, at least in the Old Testament, and it says very, very specifically, it's like, all right, don't ever cut down a tree and decorate it, okay? Never. That'd be like really bad news. So bad. We're like going to put it in our holy book. And then slowly but surely, I don't know. I just see them all over. I mean, they're lovely. I feel like the pagans and the heathens should be doing it as often. But please, Pat, how is it that a group of people, their holy book that says you probably shouldn't cut down a tree and decorate it, seem to do that every year?
Well, I'm going to leave that question to I'm going to let Dr. Giovino answer that, because I think it's chapter 3 or 4 of the book I mentioned. She does an entire chapter on the best scholarship on Asherah and the Asherah pole. I mean, I'm not going to get into it for this.
I did hear one of those words.
I read it and I loved it. Maybe at a future time we do an episode on here on Asherah, and I would use her scholarship and her reference as the basis of that episode, because I didn't have time to go, I want to read this now, because we'd already talked about this episode. But again, this isn't my area of focus. I need to be studying the Mediterranean and staying out of the Middle East and ancient Near East.
No. I will always appreciate, because it is generally the people who talk bullshit. They can talk about any subject in the world, but when you actually have a field, I just noticed that the more expertise that people seem to have in a subject, the more they seem to reference other people in maybe specific areas. I'm trying to think of the nuance of this statement. But yes.
I think James is referring to Dr. Giovino in his comment that he has put up, that she's amazing, because she is. Her scholarship is fucking outstanding. Like, I usually take, and I'm not, when I get into a book, I think the book's like 300 pages. I tore through it in like 2 days because it was that good of a book, and I'm taking notes as I read. Right. So like when I came to the chapter on Asherah, I'm like, oh, I want to like really just go down all these little rabbit holes that she puts in the side notes, right? Like, oh, this person wrote this paper that I agree with on this and this, but I disagree on this and that. So you want to go read the other paper, right? Or the book, and you can't because you don't have time, because it's before Christmas and you got to get your grades turned in, and your students get mad if you turn your grades in late.
Well, that, and while you're sitting there grading papers on the plane, terrorists take over, and then you just have to
that's true
to handle it. But yeah, sending so much love to James Wolfe. I still see so many amazing. I also no. We didn't know if he was going to show, but yet I'll show up the comment because it's actually from Pookykins, who is amazing. Pat, did Jesus help you when you destroyed Terry in your debate?
Well, it wasn't Zeus, and I don't want to give any supernatural causation, but if I was going to, it'd be the goddess Fortuna. Right?
Oh.
If I was ever going to believe in an ancient god or goddess, it would be one that many Roman soldiers referred to kind of as the fickle bitch of fortune. It would be like,
my, there's a goddess I can get behind.
Right.
But sending so much love, Pookykins. And that's right, it is at Amy Newman. Oh, let me tell you, as should we all. James, I always say there's like maybe not a supernatural force that we should worship or get on our knees for, but I will say, whether you are paying $100, having a scene, or it's just your partner who you have fallen in love with for the past 50 years, you gotta worship that ass. It really does seem to be the topic that we're going back to. What's up, Michael Smith? What is I know exactly? Cat alert. We'll do a few more questions. Keep on sending them in, and then within a few more minutes, let's see if this is a real thing. Let me do brain filtering, because he didn't shit. That's why they put up.
Well, I'll just tell James how you look through stuff. Yeah.
Don't do
Hey,
it.
I do have to say, Pat, I know you were going to have Megan talk with us. I know you were holding out on giving your answer, but I don't know if you know this. We have a true academic in the field, giving us from the preacher, because
Perry
heathens do
himself,
heathen
Dr.
sheep.
Perry.
That's why they put their stupid trees and celebrate their meaningless holidays. I feel like you are not one to get the sugar cookie mocha. That's not you, preacher?
Well, I mean, I think it's well known that a lot of Christian traditions have pagan influence. I think that's
well.
pretty
I want to
well
know why, if you're a Christian, you exchange gifts, because that whole apologetic that it has to do with the Magi giving gifts to Jesus is really funny, considering that the Roman festival that preceded it, known as Saturnalia, that basically got replaced by the Christian holiday, was about exchanging gifts, literally about exchanging gifts before the end of the year for reconciliation between people, which is very much like our old anxiety tradition, right? Like, let all the anxiety, let all acquaintance, whatever. But the Romans actually had a formal procedure. You would give all your friends little gifts, and you'd give your enemies, people that, if you wanted to quash bad feelings during Saturnalia, you would give someone a nice gift. Or if you were an asshole and you wanted to kind of let them know you still didn't like them, you give them a shitty gift, like a
not like Cole. That would be
right.
More a little bit.
But it would be like a set of Ken Hovind's DVDs.
Right. It would be something kind of like snarky, right? Something could be interpreted not well. But people exchange gifts to
AOL CD from that.
And a lot of them were like tchotchkes, right? Like little knickknacks, but it was something seen as an act of friendship between people, that particularly people that cared about each other. And the gifts were supposed to be kind of personalized to people. So if I had a beef with you during the year and I want to let you know, hey, Amy, I want to not have, or James, maybe both of you, here's a nice gift. And you go, wow, Pat must really be wanting to make up for that bad problem we had. We'd reconcile before the end of the year.
Want to just point out that I actually think tchotchkes are very tacky. This type of stuff you really even shouldn't own. I don't even know what the fuck you. Anyway.
Right.
Oh my goddess.
Yeah.
The academic questions are coming in from the whole playing field, Perry. I can see. But we're sending love. Only like a few more minutes, because I feel like these questions may be best answered for peer review, but I really am enjoying all of the energy in chat. Heathens. I will say it's basically, when it comes down to it, is that all of the fun stuff is basically non-Christian and all of the boring stuff is Christian. Not any of the, I would say, less sane, or sane isn't it's the correct word, but I'm trying to be nice. Any of the actual non-stuff, but any of the fasting stuff, any of those holidays, I'm like, I'll try a diet program, but thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions?
I know. I apologize because I'm looking.
I do know that at some point, the preacher is going to want to endure us some open chat night on his knowledge and his identification of non-true Christians. I will point out, and I'm just going to say this is kind of a challenge to him. I don't think he would know a real Christian in the first century if it bit him in the ass, because so you know,
don't you know,
right?
I mean, Pat, he personally studied the Bible 18 hours a day for several months.
Right.
He came up with his own theology.
And I'm sure that he went to the original texts in Hebrew and Greek to get there, and studied multiple early church exegesis in order to understand how those closest to the source were interpreting it 18 hours a day.
We got a debate. The next debate we brought. Once again, I was about to say, I'm going to make this joke, but I'm realizing this is like half the debates on YouTube. Once again, we are going to set up the academic versus
very scholarly
guy on internet, and we are ready to do it. We have been ready to do it from day one.
Very scholarly.
I'm already, I can. Good to have that confidence. I just called the fire department. They're sending help for Preacher's burns. Well, if Terry is any good margin for that, the crying may be going on for a long time. But let's see.
And we'll have to prepare position papers because that's how Pat does debates.
That's right. We're going to have to see what you submit, Preacher, and we'll see how many times that you can fit the Bible into APA. We'll figure it out together. What is up, Dave Gar? Should the Elgin marbles be returned to Greece?
So Dave Gar, obviously you're up on news. They're currently discussing that. The British Museum is in negotiations with the Greek government right now to see whether or not they will be. I think yes. I think there's some other issues with some Elgin marbles are one big component about repatriation, particularly when you get into the history of how they ended up in Britain from the country, from their native spots in Greece. We can talk about whether or not the Ottomans were purposely doing it to try to disenfranchise Greek people from their heritage. But I think there's a lot that should be done on how they're going to do it, right? How are they going to get these objects returned? Are they going to return them all at one time? Are they going to do it kind of in piecemeal? It's an important thing to talk about. Are they going to make exact replicas prior to them being returned so they can be given to a lot of different countries, kind of what they did with Trajan's Column, right? Trajan's Column, there's copies of Trajan's Columns that were sent throughout different places. Like you can go see a copy of Trajan's Column in Romania because of its context with the Tropaeum Traiani in a Dom Clesi. There's a lot of important considerations, and I think whenever possible, you should return objects of significant cultural heritage to the regions where they came out of. But in some cases, we can't do that. With a lot of the artwork we're looking at tonight, they were purposely removed from these countries because they were originally stored in places like Syria. So during the recent unrest in those countries, there were attempts to destroy some of these objects as well. So it's right. So how do we balance that out? Greece is probably a stable enough country, and it's been so for numerous decades since the 70s, where it's probably time that we could consider it. And I would say yes. And I've seen them at the British Museum numerous times. Yeah. Yep.
And okay, I'm gonna read one. This is your only one though, Preacher, because we could do Bible quotes all day, and then I'm only gonna look for any more questions. And if not any more questions in the next minute or two, we're gonna let Pat actually wrap up his thoughts about the topic. But all right, have him read the verse. It's because you were a gentleman. All right, so we're gonna do it. And we do love, as much as we rib on you, Preacher, and all of our fundy theist brothers and sisters, we love you.
She does.
We do. We're trying to get you onto our side, but we still love you. All right, 1 John 3:8. Oh, I remember this. This was from that same guy who he tackles people in the WW. Oh wait, different one. Okay. He that commits sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning. For this purpose, the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of evil.
Of the devil.
Of the devil. I'm sorry. I saw it twice, and somehow I ad-libbed there. Yes, that he might destroy the works of the devil. I don't know how that pertains to the subject.
I don't think the devil exists. I don't think he's real.
We don't think he's real.
I think
he's a literary trope.
I also think the preacher should really look into the authorship of 1 John and find out whether or not it's an authentic letter or not.
Oh, snap. So next time Pat sins, we don't think that we're not Christians. This is...
Not worried about it.
Yep, not worrying about it. We're sinless. Yep. It's fantastic.
Right. Awesome. Well, so we will... wrap it up in a minute, an hour and a half.
Well, Beamsy had a joke question about who he thinks digs up more dirt, a geologist or an archaeologist. I don't know if you have a snap for that.
So I've worked with geologists. They do more work than we do. I mean, they're using earth movers to sometimes get down to their samples. I'm like, we dig down a few feet, we're kind of done for the day. But then it has to do with the incremental. We're trying to remove deposition in a methodological manner. Sometimes they're trying to get to a rock core, right? So they don't care about all the dirt on top. So it's just a different technique. Like, we very rarely use heavy machinery to remove stuff, where they tend to use it quite a bit. And at least with the archaeology I'm familiar with in the Pacific Northwest and in the UK. Geologists in the UK tend to do quite a bit of detailed work alongside the archaeologists, but they tend to use a lot more heavy machinery than we do, and they tend to work.
You guys are more concerned with draining the kegs at the local pub.
There's that too. I can tell you the two groups that do not have a problem at the end of the day are geologists and archaeologists sitting around talking.
There you go.
Rocking with their socks off. And with that, we are actually going to head it over to the outros. I think James and myself are just going to do our goofiness at the end to close it out for a second. So we really just want to give it to our man of the hour, our headliner. We are going into our outro, and we are starting and ending the man, the myth, the legend. We are bringing on Pat Lowinger. Pat, it was so lovely having you with us tonight, as we always have a great time with you on. We hope you keep coming on. And we were Talk Skeptic to us tonight on the roots of the tree of life. And please tell us anything you got going on the internet, the larger world, and your final thoughts on the topic.
Well, as always, thanks for having me on. This is what you get when Josh Bowen's not available. So you get an archaeologist instead of an Assyriologist. No, but I find topics like this absolutely fascinating. Like today, you could go to Greece, you can go to Athens, you go to the Temple of Athena there and look at the sacred tree, olive tree dedicated to her inside a sanctuary space that's 3,000 years old, or roughly maybe 2,800. These kind of like the motif of trees in antiquity are really important to the study of ancient religious systems. And I think that's why I find this fascinating. But I don't have every answer. It's not my field of focus. I'm kind of peripherally related to it. There are so much people that are more qualified than me, but I'm just glad I can come on and in many ways let people know that it's not a settled argument. The information seems to point that what the Garden of Eden in the Genesis account, the tree it's referring to, has a parallel, but it may not be a direct connection to what we see in texts in ancient Mesopotamia. But overall, the motif was definitely present long before it appeared in the sacred texts that we typically refer to as the Old Testament. The Genesis account is pretty late, and for millennia before, people were using trees as divine symbols, and then the creation in particularly Assyrian mythology, but also the mythology coming out of Sumer, that the gods dwelled in sacred gardens. So between the concept of trees and the gods dwelling in sacred gardens, the Genesis account seems to come in within this cultural parallel, which is not direct, but definitely there is points of comparison that are important to suss out. And that's it.
Thank you so very much, Pat. And with that, we are just going to, I think we're going to dual hand it over to James and myself as we wrap up. James, we have been Talk Skeptic to us on the roots of the tree of life. Any final thoughts?
No, it's a really fascinating topic. It's always nice to be able to learn some actual history from somebody who actually knows a little bit about the topic. So, thanks again, Pat, for coming on. Really interesting. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Pat. Thank you for all of the commenters and questioners out there in the chatosphere. I see the preacher's very happy. I see Beebsy is still throwing love out there. Same with James Wolfe and Randolph and all of them. I do want to answer one question very quickly. So although we are a monetized channel and we do make a little bit of money that helps go towards the creating great content, it is true that James W. and myself, I think we kind of do this as a labor of love. That I saw Pine Creek talking earlier that there's technically, he doesn't view it as an atheist community, and he kind of views some of these as activists. I would okay wearing the activist label. We view ourselves a little activist. We want to be a little bit of the pushback on the theological theme channels, the apologetics, the dawa, give out good information. And it seems like Pat has an thought on this as well.
I just want to point out that for you, it's a labor of rough love.
It is such a labor of rough love. Only if I've been a good girl, though. But yes, Michael Smith, we are sending so much love. Yeah, we really do. I think James and I, we've been doing it for years at this point because we
coming up on 2 years. Yeah,
isn't that crazy?
Religion sucks, and it's wrong, and we can demonstrate that. So, and we have fun doing it.
Exactly, Regos. Basically, the mark of not of a skeptic, but most certainly an academic, which was the key to the puzzle. If you were figuring out what schmacademic rhymed with later before. But yes, with that, I do hope that you all had a fun time on this episode of Talk Skeptic to me. Oh, actually, I got one last thing. It's because it's actually been working. Who knew? But I have recently been joined out there. If you would like to get production and produced, and you have been asking yourself, hey, I want someone who at least has ancestors with Jewish blood to produce me. Yes, it is possible. I'm sorry. I have a Fiverr account out there.
You won't actually become a shape-shifting lizard,
exactly.
But you can have one work for you.
Of a shape-shifting lizard, it is time for you to get produced. And Gizmo. Gizmo is helping me set up all of this. So, first of all our Patreon tiers, they all have ways of accessing shows and ways that you can deliver your message on this channel. However, if you want your own channel, your own brand, your own message, you have something out there on there for you, I will help you produce it and launch it out there. I've actually had a few people already, which is fantastic, and I'd love to help you there. Continue yours. And on that, that's my last, the Shilly McShill. Now that has been done, I really do want to thank you all and hope that you had a fun time on this episode of Talk Skeptic to Me, the roots of the tree of life, the show where we get those with expertise or experiments to help share their knowledge with others with our special guest host, Pat Lowinger, and especially among these two schmucks with their irreverence and questions as we spent tonight climbing for the roots worth of fun. But I do want to thank my co-host, James W., along with Pat Lowinger, and also, he didn't even know it, but the extra special guest host on here, Josh, Dr. J, he knew. As well, go check out Pat Lowinger's fantastic debates. Go check out, he does coursework, the book coming soon. We could not hawk Pat enough on here. And I also want to love to all of our mods, the people in chat, and of course viewers like you who make this channel so amazing. If you enjoy the show, please don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe. It helps us get out there in the algorithms, but also you get to access that bell icon, which when set to all will send you reminders to see our premieres or join our live streams, or hey, why not leave a comment once the video's done? You can also leave a super thanks, and we'll leave thanks to you on the next episode. You can also see all of our amazing channel members by looking at the description below, as well as our Discord, the community of skeptic and ranting. Finally, the best way of helping us is by heading over to our Patreon at patreon.com/Amy Newman so that we can get even more tchotchkes. And I do want to thank you all. We will see you all on the next episode of Skeptic Ball Z. Good night. Mwah.
Good night, guys.